you very much, April. Excuse me. So I'll let you take a peek at this cartoon because I think it very perfectly epitomizes what I'm about to talk about, and also what April just mentioned about grit. Just a beautiful thing when a cartoon can capture a message such as what we have here between Calvin and his friend Sally. So, Susie, sorry, Susie. What I really love about this cartoon is it was actually created in 1995, if you can see the date there. So it actually preceded the book, Mindset, by 12 years. So I think we owe Bill Watterson, the creator of Common Hobbs, a little gratitude for that. So I'm here to talk about growth mindset, and thank you for not all getting up and walking out the door when you saw me come up, because maybe you've seen a talk I've given on growth mindset. This is my 7th talk on growth mindset in the last 9 or 10 months. So I'm still very excited and passionate about it. And just to get a feel for the room, how many of you would consider yourself growth mindset champions? Meaning that you've maybe read the book, you're incorporating it into your classroom. So good, that's maybe a third. How many of you would say you would fall in as maybe a growth mindset experimenter? You've heard of the book, maybe not read it, you've toyed with some of the practices, sometimes it's gone well, sometimes it hasn't. Okay, a little bit less. How many of you are maybe growth mindset fledglings? Never heard of it before, maybe this is the first time. It's okay to raise your hand if this is the first time. Good. So, some of you might be growth mindset naysayers, right? You've heard of this before, and you say, this is bunk, this is preposterous, I don't believe it. And I'm not going to ask you to self-identify. I will actually share that I was a growth mindset naysayer as well when I came across both the book and as well at the Pathways Institute a year and a half ago that I was invited to attend. I was at a presentation by some Stanford researchers with the PERTS group, Project for Education Research That Scales, and they were talking about very much what the author Carol Dweck is saying here, that people with the proper training can do things just as well as people who are maybe naturally gifted. And I thought, this is preposterous. Like, we can't let this infiltrate the minds at Front Range Community College. We can't let people think that they can become anything or do anything, right? I mean, so I actually sent an email to President Dorsey. I don't see that he's here, but I said, let me do some background research. I would love to look at the research on fixed mindset and growth mindset before we really adopt this into who we are as a college. And so I was a naysayer. I set out to refute this idea that our students can excel at something that they're struggling in. And guess what happened? I could not refute the data. I could not, as hard as I tried, I could not find evidence that showed not only that students maybe didn't benefit from a growth mindset, or even that it didn't always help them in every situation. So I hope that if you are a growth mindset naysayer, that you maybe open up your mind and hopefully become open to the idea that our students can excel. I have a few slides here that I'm going to title Growth Mindset Fact or Fiction. I'll present the statement, and I'd like you to turn to a neighbor sitting close to you and discuss if you believe that statement is fact or fiction. So the first one is, mindset and attitude are interchangeable ideas. Should we use those two terms, mindset and attitude, interchangeably? Do they mean one and the same thing? So just quick conversation, 30 seconds with someone sitting close to you. Okay, I was a little afraid there would be no talking, and then I remembered we're teachers and we love to talk. So mindset and attitude are interchangeable ideas. Does anyone want to raise their hand and speak to this? Would you say yes, you agree to this as fact or fiction? Okay. So that's okay to be wishy-washy. I think of it this way. I think your attitude is something that's very fleeting and very time sensitive, and it can change very quickly. So for example, you might, this morning you could have woken up with a sick kid. Because of that, you got a late start out the door. Maybe you got stuck in I-25 traffic getting here to the Boulder County campus. These are all things that happened to me this morning. So I had started off the day with a bad attitude, right? But I got here, and as you get close to the campus, you can see the snow-covered mountain peaks, and it gives you a sense of calmness. And then you hear all the wonderful things that we're doing from Tammy and April, and you see you're surrounded by all your peers. And you have a, changes your attitude, right? And so that my attitude might change 3, 4, or 5 more times today, like many of yours. But your mindset is much more deeply ingrained. And more specifically, your mindset is what you believe about yourself and your basic qualities. And it's very important because, similar, you can make the argument to your attitude. We're kind of interpreting the events that are happening around us through that mindset. Okay, so right now, even though I'm speaking, you might be thinking about, oh my gosh, should I leave my curling iron on when I left the house? Right? It's my wife's. Thank you, Kat. I get a text from my wife every morning. Check my curling iron. Make sure it's turned on. Okay. I shouldn't have worn these shoes. My feet are killing me. Right? Or I can't wait for lunch. I can't believe it's only 10:30. My stomach's already growling. So we're filtering all these thoughts that we're having through that mindset. More specifically about education and intelligence, we're going to talk now about this idea of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And as it applies to intelligence, it's also referred to as the entity theory of intelligence. And as I go through these next few slides, I really want you to think about a student that you had maybe this past spring semester. Picture that student's face, think of their name, because I bet if we really think hard enough, there will be many students who fall into one of these two categories. So a student with a fixed mindset, they believe that intelligence, whatever intelligence they have was given to them at birth, right? It's an inheritable trait. It's not going to change. It's fixed for their lifetime. So think about a student whose focus is on their performance and their outcomes. They have a high emphasis on the grade that they're going to get in your class, or the grade that they did get in your class. And not saying in of itself that's a bad thing, but it can be when that focus overrides learning and the process of learning. So these students will have a desire to look smart, although they may have some inner worries or concerns about their intelligence. To them, effort or grit is not a good thing, right? Because they shouldn't have to work hard in your class. If intelligence is something that they've been given at birth, it should come easy to them. So effort is very negative, fruitless, and this is something that the author, Carol Dweck, has called the low effort syndrome. So if there's a big exam or test coming up in your class, this student would be inclined to just read their textbook and go over their notes. Read their textbook some more and go over their notes. Now, I know there's several of you right now saying, yeah, like I would love my students to read the textbook and go over the sign my students up for the low effort syndrome, please. We know that there's more to academic success than just reading the textbook and going over the notes. These students will avoid challenges in your class. Again, if intelligence is something that I've inherited at birth, I really shouldn't be challenged at all. It should just come naturally and easily. So if there is a challenge, they will give up easily. They'll exhibit a sense of helplessness. So are you thinking of a student or students in your classes who have these kind of qualities? They will ignore even constructive criticism, which we're trying to help our students overcome, succeed in our classes, but all they're hearing is, if I was gonna be successful in this class, it would have already happened, right? So why are you trying to help me? Because it's really pointless. They're threatened by the success of others. And oftentimes, if they fail an exam, their first they have two inclinations. They'll look for someone who did worse than them because it makes them feel better about their own poor performance, right? Oh, at least I did, I failed, but I didn't do as bad as this person. And then because so many of our programs are grade-centric, right? They really, the GPA is very important. One of the initial responses to students when they fail an exam is to do what on the next exam? Cheat, right? It's not to study harder. It's not to go back and work more. It's to, I need to get an A in this class. I need to get an A on this exam, so I'm going to cheat to get there. And their internal monologue is very much centered on judging themselves. And I have a slide here that shows some of the common fixed mindset inner monologue, or sometimes it's not always inner monologue. These are things that students will say to us in our classes. I'm either good at it or not. My abilities are unchanged. I can either do it or I can't. I don't like to be challenged. When I'm frustrated, I give up. So think about that student who has these types of thoughts, these types of qualities and characteristics. What does college look like to that student? What does your class that they're struggling look like? Is that going to be a welcoming place? Is it going to be a place that, I can't wait to get to that class today, right? Where my instructor is going to challenge me and force me to work hard. It's going to be very intimidating to them, right? Especially if we share that fixed mindset belief about our students. Oh, so-and-so, they're never going to get this, right? It doesn't matter how hard they try or work, they're never going to understand this material. Okay, so now they're getting a double dose of fixed mindset. The opposite, the growth mindset, or what's called the incremental theory of intelligence, is this belief that we can develop intelligence just like any other skill or ability, but it requires three things: dedication to hard work, effort, or if you want to use grit, effective strategies, and help from others. So again, think of students who value learning and mastery. They don't not care about their grades, but they are looking at the process of learning as being key and valuable to them. Effort is the path to that mastery. They will embrace challenges, not run from them. They will exhibit persistence and resilience. So when they have a challenge, or maybe they don't do so as well on a quiz or exam, right? They're going to persist through that. They are going to look to you for feedback and constructive criticism from which they will accept and learn, as well as from their peers. So students who have the growth mindset look at challenges and academics in a very different light. So their inner monologue isn't based on judging themselves harshly, but believing that they can overcome and persevere. So can you picture this student in your mind? What is this student's view of college and your class like? Yeah, excited to be in your class, right? Grateful? Excellent, yep, grateful to be there.
I don't mean to make too many blanket statements, but I find a lot of my returning students have this mindset rather than a lot of the more traditional students.
That's interesting, okay. And I know that growth mindset is an idea that's very much born out of the not born out of, but I should say it's being emphasized heavily in the K-12 educational domain right now. So chances are you might have a K-6 student who's hearing about the growth mindset. So it just might be a generational thing there, as well as we learn lessons throughout our lives that we don't have when we first enter college. Okay, next fact or fiction question. One's intelligence is largely determined by their genes. I'll give you 30 seconds. Okay, so intelligence is largely determined by their genes. We're a little bit short on time, or I should say I'm a little bit long-winded, so we need to get moving here. There's obviously research on intelligence and genes, and this study came out about a year ago, identified 40 new genes that were, I think it's very important to point out, that influence human intelligence, right? The authors are very careful to use influence, not determine. And even in their, even the authors in their popular press article said that we need to look at the big scope of this and realize that intelligence is profoundly shaped by the environment as well. It's not totally dictated by one's genetic traits. And so we, as educators, we should be a little bit upset, outraged, when the correspondent writer titles their article, "Smarty Pants Have 40 New Reasons to Thank Their Parents for Their Powerful Brains," because that lends credence to this idea that if you're smart, you inherited it from your parents, correct? But if you're not smart, then your parents probably weren't smart either. So this really irked me to no end when I saw, and that's putting it lightly, when I saw that the correspondent writer used this to sell the research, right? To kind of spice it up, make it sexy, or whatever the case was. Yeah, clickbait, thank you. So just remember, there is a connection between intelligence and genes, but it's not one that determines it. Okay, next one. Preaching a growth mindset in your class gives marginalized students false hope. Fact or fiction? 30 seconds, go. Okay, I hope everyone's answer to that one was fiction. I'm hoping. And in fact, the research would support this idea that, in fact, that the growth mindset really assists those marginalized students the most, right? They're the ones who are going to be the benefactors from us indoctrinating a growth mindset into our classrooms. So there's tremendous research to support this idea. They've done research on Native American reservations, inner cities, schools with diverse populations, schools that have high percentage of low-income students, special needs students, English as a second language students. This stuff really works, and I'm not going to go through all the research slides I've done in past talks, but if anyone would like, I can provide the references for that. Praising effort and telling struggling students to try harder embraces the growth mindset. Fact or fiction? So praising effort and telling struggling students to try harder embraces the growth mindset. Again, 30 seconds to talk about this one and we'll... I was just accused of being crafty. I was just told this is a trick question. So, do we want to praise our students' effort and their grit? Absolutely, right? Like April was saying, you know, she learns grit from her students. Is that always necessarily enough? Does it really fully embrace the growth mindset? Not always. And I'll show you reasons why. So these are fixed mindset teacher comments that we might make. And I think there's some reference to math class there, but fill in the blank with whatever class you teach or class that you know that students struggle in. Not everybody is good at math, just do your best, that's okay. Maybe math is not one of your strengths. Again, we're not picking on math instructors or the math subject. Don't worry, you'll get it if you keep trying. Great effort, you tried your best. These are all things that you and I have definitely said to students in our classes, right? And we think that we are helping our students, when actually this is referred to as not only fixed mindset comments or statements, but comfort praise, right? We come alongside, and many of us are parents, so we're accustomed to comforting our kids when they're struggling or they're in pain. So we say these things to comfort our students when it's really actually a disservice. So in addition to, again, praising effort is, I don't want to say it's never bad, but it's not always enough. Right? We want to praise the process that students used, which can involve some of the effort, but also the process of learning that they went about. So finding ways, when students do well or don't do well, what was the process they used, and try to praise that, as well as saying, you know what, not just saying try harder, because we know what happens when if a student's using the wrong strategy, and we can see that clearly, what are we telling them when we say try harder? Try harder using that wrong strategy, as if that's by dumb luck you're going to arrive at the right answer, right? That doesn't always, it actually rarely works. So we want them to strategize, and sometimes we provide the new strategies. Sometimes the new strategies come from someone at the Academic Success Center or from a friend or peer in the class. So growth mindset statements, we want to embrace these, in addition to just praising effort and telling students to try harder. When you learn how to do a new kind of problem, it grows your brain. If you catch yourself saying, I'm not a fill-in-the-blank person, just add the word yet to the end of the sentence. That feeling of math being hard is the feeling of your brain growing. Okay, so some best, as I wrap up here quickly, some best educator practices. Set high expectations and challenge your students. Don't dilute your course, right? Make it difficult to succeed, but with the right strategies, with grit and help from others, students can get there. Create a risk-tolerant learning zone, which I know one of our speakers is going to talk about later. Provide, again, process-oriented feedback, not just saying, good job, nice effort, try harder. Introduce students to the idea of the malleable brain. Through these three ideas, effort, new strategies, and help from others, they can grow their intelligence. Intelligence is not a fixed trait. Also, find ways to harness your students' growth-mindedness. Many of our students, we're not just in all areas of our lives growth-minded or fixed-minded. And sometimes we have to identify where are our students growth-minded and how did they get that way, so that way we can make them see that, yes, while math is a difficult subject, you can apply the same growth mindset principles that you did in other areas of your life to become successful in this class. And that takes time, right? That takes those little moments before and after class to get to know your students and know what they're doing outside of your classroom. And then lastly, share your story. Whether we want to believe it or not, we are in many ways role models and an inspiration to our students, as we just heard. So, at the right time in my classes, I share with my students that my undergraduate degree took 3 different colleges, 5 different majors, 11 total semesters, and a detour through the Massachusetts Army National Guard so I could pay for my schooling. Okay, and so we have stories, very powerful stories. I'll share another one with you. We have, within our own ranks here at the Boulder County campus, we have an instructor in the math department who started out, went back to school as a non-traditional student, started off in a math class that would be equivalent to our 050, so very elementary math class, has gone on to since take 27 more math classes, achieve a bachelor's, master's, and now is ABD for a doctorate in math. Does anyone know who I'm referring to? This young lady over here, Bernadette Mendoza. An incredible story of someone who started off at really the lowest possible level within a subject. Probably had her share of struggles that she could share with you, but through a growth mindset is now one of us teaching our students. So share your story, very powerful. And then lastly, I hope you leave here today believing that your students can get smarter, that you encourage and inspire them that learning is their goal. And this is tough, not just necessarily getting an A in your class is the goal, but learning is the goal. Effort and grit makes them stronger, which in turn inspires them to spend more time in your classes and leads to higher achievement. I have just one last thing I want to share. I have this student who I think of every time I show this slide. He was in my nutrition class this semester. He came up to me after a class that we were talking about hormones and how insulin works to regulate blood glucose. And very kind, polite student. The best way to describe him is he was like a more studious version of Jeff Spicoli. You know, in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Just very laid back, easygoing. And he came up to me and he said, "I really love your class. I had no idea," he's a nursing major. He said, "I had no idea nutrition and biology went hand in hand. Your class is really helping me to understand biology better." And in my head, I thought, like, nutrition, biology, like to me, it was a natural that they would go together. But to this student, it was completely new and a foreign concept. And it reminded me of my own expert blind spot, right? And it also reminded me, it's not about me in the classroom, it's about what my students are synthesizing, not just in my class, but across their entire curriculum. And so that was one of my most powerful moments as an instructor this semester. So thank you very much for your time. I'll hand it over back to you.